A basketball hero around here is treated like a god. I mean, how can you ever find out what he could really do? I don't want this to be the high point of his life. I've seen them, the real sad ones. They sit around the rest of their lives talking about the glory days when they were 17 years old.
You know, most people would kill to be treated like a god just for a few moments.
John, tell us about you were the manager, and the next year you're going to play. Tell us about leading up to your senior year at Loogootee.
Okay, well, Billy, I got to give you some history to kind of set the stage. This is the second interview, and I want to tell you, you're in a little bit of trouble because I made 7 pages of notes. That's the bad news. The good news, they were 3x3 Post-its. I still think, in terms of basketball, and I'm going to do a bird impression. There's a bird that whistles this way. I don't know if you can hear that. Every time I hear that, what I think is move your feet, move your feet, move your feet from basketball practice, defensive drills. My kids get a kick out of when we're driving. If a car turns a certain way or another car is slow or whatever, I always say, well, that car's setting a pick for me so I can get around. All right. So basketball is never too far from my thoughts, but my introduction to sports in Loogootee, that's going to get me to my senior year eventually. Our first organized sport was Little League. Little League was maybe 60 kids and 1 adult. And the first day, the 1 adult, the principal of the high school, Mr. Page, picked about the 5 oldest kids, and the kids drafted their own teams. If I remember right, my first year I was drafted last. We never got dehydrated. Believe it or not, there weren't sports drinks. Our parents didn't come to the dugouts to bring us snacks and drinks, partly because we didn't have dugouts and partly because we played all of our games in the middle of weekday mornings. It was Little League. It was kids playing ball. There was no adult involvement. We didn't wear uniforms. So I'm telling you all that to tell you this. We made our own decisions. We decided who was going to play where, who was going to bat in what position, who was going to bunt, and all that business. And the lessons we learned were fantastic. One of the best ones is my best friend, Rex Sager, was the captain of my team one year when I was good. And the all-star team was going to be the best 2 players off of each team as chosen by the team captain, not by any adults and not by Mr. Page. I was the 3rd best player on my team, and I knew it, but Rex was my best buddy. So I thought, I'll make the all-star team. Well, Rex picked the 2 best players, and I didn't make it. So the lesson I learned was it's not who you know, it's what you can do. And we learned so many valuable lessons, and that was that way going all the way, that you earned what you got. So I said the last time we talked that I made the 7th grade team as a 6th grader, and I've got to say that we had good coaches all the way through, and I'm going to name some names. Lee Kavanaugh, Charles Sims was my freshman coach, track and cross country coach. Tim Nanti, and you and I talked about both having connections to that family. You ran into Tim's little brother or son?
Son.
Was it Terry that you ran into,
yes,
or Bruce?
Terry.
It was his son at ISU, and then of course Jack Butcher. So we had great coaches. Probably the most memorable thing that happened to me in junior high basketball, I would have been an 8th grader. We were shooting free throws at the end of a practice. And we had to hit 15 free throws, and we had to run a lap for every free throw we missed getting to 15. What was memorable was I ran 28 laps. I hit 15 out of 43 free throws. Horrendous. Just horrendous. So the next game we play, the 8th grade team plays, we're playing Shoals, which is our county rival, and I get in with 2 seconds to go. we're down a point. I get in with 2 seconds to go because somebody fouls out. We take a last second shot. It misses badly. The rebound falls in my hands. We've lost. We start to walk off the floor, and there's a referee going crazy, looking right at me and pointing and blowing a whistle. Man, all I did was stand there and missed and caught an air ball. I got fouled, evidently. So now with no time on the clock and us down 1 point, a 15 for 43 free throw shooter is going to the line to shoot a 1-and-1. I don't even get to shoot 2 shots and have a chance to tie the game. You know, if I don't hit the first shot, we lose. Nobody's on the lane because there's no time on the clock. I'm the only person people are yelling at. And to make a long story a little less long, I hit them both. What are the chances? I hit them both. You know, that people talk about, well, I remember something like it happened yesterday. I remember like it happened 15 minutes ago. You know, there were some highlights early on before my senior year. It looks like, looking at yearbook pictures, I probably started a few games on my freshman team. I would have been by far the worst of the starters. And I know that as a sophomore on the JV team, from time to time we'd have somebody out, and this always cracked me up. The coach would say, "Okay, Scott's out tonight. You're going to have to make up for him. You're going to have to score 10 or 12 points." You know, Billy, I'd always think if I could score 10 or 12 points just because you told me to, I'd be starting instead of Scott. Okay? So one of the things that happened was I didn't realize I started school, or my freshman year, I was 5'2" or 5'4". I didn't realize I was growing. And while I played ball through my sophomore year, I was still playing guard. And never blocked anybody's shot in my life. But my junior year, I played some pickup ball, and every once in a while I practiced with the JV. And there were times that I realized that I didn't, not so much that I was getting taller, but that I could jump. We were always taught when somebody goes in for a layup, even if it's a breakaway, you got to follow them because they might miss. And there were times that I would follow and I'd jump in case they missed, and the ball would go in, and all of a sudden I'm kind of startled at how high off the ground I am. You know, so I was getting taller. I remember in my junior year practicing once with the JV, and I blocked somebody's shot out of the air. They shot from the baseline. I could within a foot mark the place on the floor at Loogootee High School where he took the shot. I was guarding the center, so I got 2 or 3 steps, and everybody was really kind of amazed. So I was growing, but I didn't realize I was growing. So finally, I made the freshman team, or excuse me, the varsity team as a senior, as what I've always called a deep sub. A deep sub is that probably 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th man. Deep subs, there are some things we think about that the starters and the first subs don't think about. Whether you have a good night or not is often determined by how good you were in warm-ups, whether you're hitting in warm-ups or not, because that may be the only time you'll shoot all night. Sometimes you want to gauge. You don't want to get sweaty during warm-ups because then you won't have to take a shower after the game because you're not going to play. You know, there's jockeying for deep subs. There's jockeying for who's sitting on the very end of the bench and who's sitting in the number 9 spot. So most of us on the varsity really took seriously, our deep sub role. But you're also calculating lead versus time left in the game. And at some point you begin to look up the bench thinking, when are they going to look down here and realize we're up 20 with 3 minutes to go and we're not going to lose? This was before 3-pointers. Nobody's going to make a comeback. And once they start looking down the bench and they know that they're going to put you in, you just are praying for a turnover. You're praying for a dead ball. It just seems like there are fewer dead balls at the end of a game, so you can't put the subs in. So that's kind of where deep subs, where your parents are sitting, where your girlfriend's sitting. There are just a lot of things that you think about that the players don't really think about, the players who play all the time. So you make the team, and one of the things that at Loogootee in those days that came with making the varsity is you had a gold blazer with a lion patch on the pocket. So we dressed. We wore nice pants. We wore dress shoes. We wore ties, and we wore these blazers. And the varsity would sit behind the B team during the B team game. And at the end of the third quarter, one of the veterans on the varsity would stand up, and that's really kind of the start of the varsity game. All the varsity players stand up. We walk off the floor. The crowd roars because the varsity's getting ready to get dressed to do battle. And I think there's some mental preparation to that. You know, the word uniform means one form. Everybody's identical, and the Blazers lent to that. All right, you were a team before you ever put on the team uniform. That blazer was part of the uniform. So the first game of the season, I'm just going to make this contrast. The first game of the season, I didn't start, and the last game of the season, I did. And there was a gradual increase in playing time over the course of the season. I did look up some things, as I said. We played 4 centers in our first game, and the centers combined had 17 points, 25 rebounds, and 16 fouls. Way too many fouls. And our starting center that first game lost his job. He lost the starting job the first game. He had I don't know. He maybe had four points and 3 or 4 rebounds, and we had other centers who came in who did a better job than he did. I had 2 points and 4 rebounds in that game. We won our first 2 games. The pressure on us, there was some pressure on us to be really good because, of course, the year before they went to the state finals.
Right.
So, you know, in 1970, I don't know what their big slogan was, but for us it was going like 70. You know, the comparison started immediately, going like 70. I thought, yeah, we traded a 6'6" forward for a 5'11" forward and a 6'5" center for a 5'11" center, going like 70. So the comparisons were there right off the bat. So we're 2-0, and we go to play at Bar Reeve, and Bar Reeve was one of our biggest rivals. They're about 10 miles away. Our third game, we lose. And really, it's kind of devastating to be 2-1. You know, if we were only going to win 2 out of every 3 games, we weren't going to be going like 70. We weren't going to begin to play the way we wanted to play. I remember when my son played basketball here in Terre Haute at one of the high schools. There was a parent meeting, and the coach talked about with some pride how they win 70% of their games. You know, they typically win 70% of their games, and I was thinking, wow, 14-6? Aren't you guys constantly disappointed? You know, I mean, the junior year they went 24-4. My year we ended up going 23-4. You know, 70% of the games. So anyway, we lose to Bar Reeve. Then we go on I think about we went on a 9-game winning streak. We played Bloomfield, and this is before class basketball. Bloomfield is about 25 miles from Loogootee. Bloomfield and Loogootee were both ranked in the top 25 statewide. So, I mean, we were playing good competition. Our 11th or 12th game was against Bar Reeve again, but it was a home game, and we beat them by 2 points. They eked out a 1-point win at Bar Reeve, and we slaughtered them by 2 at Loogootee. Okay. Now, I didn't play in that game either, but the Loogootee-Bar Reeve game at Loogootee was noteworthy for this reason. In those days, you could not dunk in the game. It was a technical. This was another. I said last time, Lou Alcindor and I didn't get to play freshman ball or varsity ball in college. They just had freshman teams. He wasn't allowed to dunk in games, and I wasn't either. All right, and truthfully, you couldn't even dunk in the warm-ups, or it was a technical. But there were 2 of us who could dunk a basketball just barely, and the crowd loved it, and the team loved it. So what would happen during warm-ups is the captains would go out and meet with the referees, and the captains would position themselves so they were looking. The captains of our team were looking at us warming up. So the referees, to make eye contact with our captains, had to have their backs to our warm-up line, so I could dunk the ball and the crowd could go crazy, and the refs wouldn't see it. Because, man, I can't imagine the deep sub having a game start with a technical because they dunked. So there's a picture in the yearbook of me dunking. And part of the reason there's a picture of the yearbook of me dunking is because I was the yearbook editor. All right. So we've got this picture that really didn't come into play until 2 or 3 years later. 2 or 3 years later, I met this girl at IU. As it turns out, this girl grew up about 7 miles away from me, and she went to Bar Eve. As it turns out, she was a cheerleader at Bar Eve. As it turns out, in my high school senior yearbook picture of me dunking, the Bar Eve cheer block is in the background, and there's a girl who's a cheerleader in the front of that cheer block. This is going to choke me up a little bit. On the 24th of this month, I will have been married to that girl for 46 years.
Oh, wow.
You never know how basketball is going to connect you.
No kidding.
Entirely a coincidence that she's in that picture, and entirely a sports coincidence that I met her at IU. I was wearing a Bar Reef track singlet that somebody had found, and she recognized it. 46 years, I love her now like I loved her then. So that was what was noteworthy in the Bar Reeve game. We were 11-1. We were getting near Thanksgiving, and my memory wants to tell me we practiced on Thanksgiving afternoon. I think more realistically, we practiced the day after Thanksgiving, which a lot of years was a day off of practice. We had a player who I think the coach felt had a weight problem, and he didn't want that player to have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to eat without a practice. So we practiced the day after Thanksgiving. We had a holiday tournament, and the holiday tournament was interesting. We played North Davies, South Knox, and North Knox. And I think the 3 games after the holiday tournament, we played North Davies, South Knox, and North Knox. But during the holiday tournament, it was played at North Davies. What I remember about it as a deep sub was that our player bench was in the cheer block, was the first row of the cheer block. And I think either my girlfriend sat next to me or behind me, and I might have eaten some popcorn during the game. So I probably shouldn't have been surprised I didn't get in the game. All right. But the subs were really kind of steamed because we won the tournament, and both games we won by about 20 points, and we didn't play a second, which kind of violates every principle of deep subdom. I mean, you win by 20 points, you should get in at least with 30 seconds to go. I've talked before about Coach Butcher being a genius, and I think that looking back on it, he knew that when we got to the tournament, we were going to play on a Friday night, we were going to play on a Saturday night, we were going to play 2 nights in a row. And he might have to have his starters play all game Friday and all game Saturday. So while I was being a little egocentric and was a little hurt that I didn't get to play either of those games, I think that clearly he was preparing for the tournament and playing his guys the whole game 2 nights in a row. So sometimes when you're kids, you just aren't smart enough to figure out what the coach or what other adults are doing. We lost 2 more times in the regular season. We of course, the one to Bar Reeve I didn't play in. We lost to Bedford. This was before it was Bedford North Lawrence. We lost in overtime. There was a guy, I'd like to say his name was, no, I'm not going to say. I can't remember exactly. We had a guy that came in with about a 12 or 13 point average, and he scored in the 30s over us and hit something like 15 out of 16 free throws. And he just gassed our center. I think I got to play because I was in good shape and I could get up and down the floor, and we played close. But for a guy who didn't play in a lot of games, I played a lot in that loss, and we played against Orleans and got beat by 9 or 10, and I played a lot in that game. So it's kind of odd to not play in some close games, but to play a lot in our losses. We get to the last game of the season, and at that point, we've already played 19 games. I didn't play in all of them, but by the end of 19 games, I had 15 points, 20 and 23 rebounds, which was less than a point a game and just slightly over a rebound a game. That's the level of play. I played hard in practice, but I was good for a point and a rebound if I played. I started the last game of the season against Winslow and scored 9 points and 15 rebounds. So that just came out of no place. I did everything I was always told to do. I blocked out on rebounds. I probably had 4 points just following guys on fast break layups, and they missed the layups. And as they rolled off the rim, I put them in. I just did what we did in practice. I did what I was told to do, 9 points and 15 rebounds. So a game like that, well, that's a great surprise, but that can be looked at as a fluke, okay? So the next week, we're practicing for sectional week, which is going to start on Thursday. Thursday, we played Washington Hatchets, a traditional, I don't know if they're a traditional rival. They were from a bigger school. The Hatchets won the Washington sectional for years and years and years. And I didn't play at all that Thursday game. So I went from 9 points, 15 rebounds to 0 seconds played. Friday morning, early, the coach pulls me out of class, wants to meet me in the guidance office. On the way to the guidance office, I see a couple of students throwing up, vomiting in the hallway. The coach sits me down, and he says that two of our starters, Brian Canada, the all-time leading scorer, and Steve Beasley, one of our centers, they're not even coming to the game. And I'm thinking, well, that's a nice courtesy that he's letting me know, and I'm wondering why he's telling me this. Well, he's telling me, you're going to start. Well, I don't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. I'd only started one game before, but it was, I had a really good game, and so I had all day to think about starting. And I really, once the other players realized I was going to starting, tremendous support from my teammates. And I've talked about this game some anyway, both of these. The Washington Catholic game was the one where I just got chewed up the first quarter, and then we pressed, and our guards made me look good. I found a quote, in that John Olsen sparked a third quarter press. Well, I'm going to give credit where credit's due again. Paul Bruner and Tony Smith picked their guards up, made them pick the ball up higher on the court than they should have, made the passes into the interior longer. I could come around and make steals. So I reaped the benefits of the press, but I didn't have a bad game. I scored 8 points and had 13 rebounds. And one of the highlights, Washington Catholic had a 6'7" center. And now I'm again doing this interview from my truck out in front of Terre Haute South High School. And I walk through that school at passing period, and I'm amazed. It's a school of about 1,500 students. I'm amazed at how many kids there are who are taller than me. I'm a little under 6'3", and I think our coach would have just been salivating over all of this height. Height was a rare commodity. We had a 6'7" kid move in one time, and the coach was so excited until he took him down to the gym, and the kid couldn't jump up and touch the rim. He couldn't jump to a conclusion. All right, but Washington Catholic had a 6'7" kid, and he was good. And I blocked him out on a rebound, but he and I both grabbed the ball. I pulled the ball down in front of me. He had his arms around me with his hand on the ball. Our crowd was going crazy wanting a foul, but he really didn't touch me. He tied the ball up, and we jumped against each other. So here's probably a 4-year, 6'7" starter jumping against a 6'2" former student manager and sub, and I got the tip on him. Okay. Well, our crowd went crazy. They were just kind of, they were behind me after the last game of the regular season. Boy, they were really getting on board because I started and was coming through. I got this tip. It was like, I wished I'd had some lead to touch and turn into gold. It was kind of like that, So we win the game, and now we're going to go into the sectional final, and this had never happened to me before. They sent me home with heat packs wrapped to my calves to keep from getting cramps. This was this didn't happen all the time, but on back-to-back games, I think our starters were probably used to this. There was a substance called Kramer-Jezik. You were a manager. Did you ever run into this?
Oh,
Kramer-Jezik.
The Kramer brand is everything that we use. But yeah, I remember that.
Okay, so this is like a thick grease, except it generates some heat. You don't want to have that on your hands and adjust your jock. I'll just leave it there. That stuff burns. So not only did I get heat packs on my calves to go home, but they sent me home with a piece of steak to have for breakfast. I mean, our coach was ahead of his time, and they didn't take any chances. They wanted to make sure we were going to eat well and so on. So I'm going home, not necessarily with the knowledge that I'm going to start the next night, but maybe I'm going to play, you know. So in the morning, or during the day, I should say, Tony Smith, who was a starter the year before, played varsity, dressed varsity 4 years, and Rex Arvin, who was another deep sub but a good buddy of mine, they came over early. They were trying to keep me loose. You know, I still was kind of in this fog of it's just hard to describe to people how you go from 0 to 60 and how to process it all. So we're playing Bar Reef for the championship, and that's the third time we played them. They beat us by 1, we beat them by 2. Now we're playing them for the championship.
Hey, John was Coach Todd Rank the coach at Bar Reef at that time?
Joe Todrank.
Okay.
Joe Todrank, and he was one of my wife was a junior at Bar Reef. He was one of her teachers. I've run into him several times since, and he realizes it was kind of flukish. We had 2 guys coming back from being sick. Beasley in Canada did start against Bar Reeve after having the flu the night before. Bar Reeve's one of their starters, I think he was messing around and jumped off of a car and twisted his ankle and didn't get to play. I've heard that plenty over the years, that they weren't at full strength, but you play with who you've got.
Exactly.
So we start, and it's a tight game, and actually Bar Reeve has the lead early in that game, but they start to get into some foul trouble. And late in the second quarter, it's a close game. We're maybe down 1 or 2, but late in the second quarter, Bar Reef has a wonderful guard named Glenn Craney. He has been a judge, I think a federal judge. He's an author now. Just a really good guard. He picked up his 3rd foul, and they pulled him out and put in a sophomore. The sophomore went on to be a really great guard, but you brought a sophomore in against our 2 very experienced guards, and they made life miserable for him. At the same time that Bar Reeve took out their guard for foul trouble, they took out our center. He had 2 fouls. They didn't want him to get his 3rd, and he'd missed the night before with the flu, and they wanted to give him rest. So with 2 minutes to go in the half, throw me in. I can't screw things up too much. And I've got to tell you, though, the crowd was chanting my name. They were chanting for me to get in. I was aware of it. And I think a good player, I think a starter wouldn't be aware of it. And I didn't know what to make of it. But when they put me in, there was a roar. And by halftime, in the last 2 minutes, I had 4 points. So I didn't hurt us. I didn't realize till afterwards that one of my, and both of my baskets were tip-ins. One of my tip-ins put us ahead for good. We didn't run out to a big lead, but we never trailed again. But that's, they started me the 3rd quarter again to rest our center. And I'm sure the idea was once the magic wore off, they could pull me out and, put a starter back in. It looks like I played the entire 3rd quarter. 4th quarter, they brought our starting center back in, and we went into our 4 corners offense. Well, they called it 4 corners offense. Corners offense. We called it 3 out, 2 under. We had 3 guys out top, our 2 experienced guards plus Brian Canada, who played guard in college. They did kind of a weave, and we had 2 guys that stood in the baseline corners. And in consecutive games, I think in the Friday night, are you getting somebody's calling me? Are you getting this beep?
I am not.
Okay, then I'm going to ignore it then. In 2 consecutive nights in the 4th quarter, I think we hit 8 out of 9 shots. We only took layups, and that's the way we practiced. We only took layups in practice off the 4 corner. So it was very, very efficient. It was not intended to stall. And Loogootee in later years played some of these, 11 to 12 ball games, these stall ball games. We didn't. Ours was intended to score, but only layups. So I ended up scoring 10 points in that game. The only time I ever scored 10 points. I had 5 rebounds, which is tied for high rebounding. With under a minute to go, I got fouled and went to the free throw line to shoot 2 shots. And, my highlight free throw shooting career was hitting a 1-and-1 in 8th grade after going 15 for 43 in practice. All right. But I hit the 2 shots. What's noteworthy about that was there was a senior deep sub from Bar Reeve who came in the last minute, who's been my brother-in-law for 46 years.
Oh, wow.
So the first time I ran into my brother-in-law was on the basketball court. My wife, I didn't really run into her. She was in the background pictures on a basketball court. And I should say that when we lost at Bar Reeve, we had to drive through the town of Montgomery. We had to go by this, oh my gosh, this farmer redneck bar. It's called the Farmer's Bar. It was a place we thought that anybody from Loogootee would be killed. It just had the reputation of just being so totally Bar Reeve. Okay, so this is my father-in-law's bar. I didn't. So I really jumped into Bar Reeve with both feet. So we win the Bar Reeve game. We're the sectional champs, and I'm going to read something to you. This is verbatim. I have the audio tapes from the radio broadcast. After we win, of course, the crowd rushes the floor. We're getting ready to cut down the nets. The first person the radio announcer can grab is Tim Nante, who's my JV coach. And they said, the announcer says, "You have a fine ball club out there, real fine guards." And Coach Nante says, "Yep, a super sub out there. Our last year's student manager did a whale of a job." Announcer: "Was Olsen the manager last year?" Nante: "He was a student manager last year." Yes. Announcer: "He came off the bench last night and had 15 rebounds." Nante: "I think he had 10 points this evening." This was the first person he talked about, and the announcer said, "Yeah, we had these fantastic guards. They started in the state finals last year. They were instrumental in running our team." They went to me, the deep sub. Then they get a hold of Coach Butcher. And I'm reading this for every deep sub, every kid that doesn't think they get to play enough, every parent who thinks their kid's going to play more because they're going to interfere. I'm reading this verbatim for all of those people. The announcer says to Coach Butcher, "We were kidding Tim up here a while ago, and we asked if you have any more student managers you're going to bring up." Coach Butcher: "Well, John has done an outstanding job, no question about that. He was a student manager for us last year. He came out as a freshman and sophomore, just a little bitty skinny kid, and ended up that he didn't play at all, of course, when we got all the boys from St. John's. We did have to limit the number of kids on the varsity, and usually juniors, they're either cut or they move up to varsity. Old John wanted to come out this year, and we had a suit, and he's done a real fine job. I think it is an important factor in any athletic contest, and certainly our boys do have good attitudes, and John's is right up at the top. I think this is really what has carried him as far as it has." He talked about attitude. He didn't talk about 15 rebounds. He didn't talk about 10 points. He talked about a person that wanted to be on the team so bad they were a manager for a year, and a person who worked hard in practice. I take great pride in him talking about attitude. And this is nothing against my parents, although parents today may think, well, they didn't help you at all. That's the point. Parents don't have to help their kids be successful in sports. They shouldn't have to. The only reasons that parents have to help their kids be successful in sports is because the parents are competing against other parents. If parent A is going in and talking to the coach about playing time, then parent B has to. My parents didn't interfere in any way, shape, or form. So anything that happened to me athletically was because of the attitudes they instilled in me and how I applied that to sports. So the next little phase over the weekend was probably the most confusing thing to me altogether. I think about Rex Sager and Brian Canada and Tony Smith and Jim Trout and Paul Bruner, the starters on the state finalist team. And these guys who are stars, I don't think people understand the scrutiny they're under. I met with my girlfriend after the sectional championship, and we went down to talk to her parents at a restaurant in town in Loogootee. I walked in and got a standing ovation. I walked into church next day, and everybody clapped before the service started. There was a Southern Indiana basketball magazine called Hoopla that had 2 or 3 paragraphs just about the object lesson of being a good teammate, and it was like I didn't know how to deal with the attention. Playing 3 games over a 4-game span. The first game of sectional I didn't play at all. I went from less than a point a game and slightly over a rebound a game to 9 points and 11 rebounds a game over 3 games. So it's not a fluke at that point. But I'm not Brian Canada, who scored almost 1,700 points in his high school career. I'm not Jim Trout, who averaged over 20. My average was 40 points. I averaged 40 points for an entire career. I played 1 year, I scored 40 points. We've had guys at Loogootee, I think Dave Hawkins may have scored more. I think we had a couple of guys who scored more than 40 points in a game. And I just began to wonder, how do these guys cope with everybody knowing them and making a comment and you're going to have a good game again tonight and so on and so forth. It really was humbling. You might think it would give you a big head, and maybe for some people it would. Maybe it's the way I was raised. It really made me humble. I really didn't want to talk too much about it. So then we go on to the regional, and we played Terre Haute Gerstmeyer, which is Terre Haute at one time Vigo County may have had 10 or 12 high schools. Gerstmeyer was a powerhouse. Coach Howard Sharp was the all-time winningest high school coach. Coach Butcher was catching him. This was going to be Gerstmeyer's last season, because the next year they would become Terre Haute North High School. We outscored Gerstmeyer something like 34-17 in the first half. We were just killing them. And the second half, they outscored us 33-17, meaning we won by a point. We won by a point, and they missed 2 or 3 last-second shots. And living in Terre Haute for the last 40 years or so, I run into a lot of Gerstmeyer people, a lot of former players, a lot of former fans. I really would like the newspaper to do a series on the 50th anniversary, that'll be a year from now, of that game, because it was big town versus small town, the all-time winningest coach against the guy would take over for him. There are just a lot of subplots. So to me, basketball, as I've gotten older, the game is just the surface, everything that's behind it, who plays and who doesn't and why they play. There are so many interesting stories. So we ended up winning our regional. We went to Summit State, won the morning game of the Summit State against the Tell City, who had a 6'7" kid. His dad's name was Locke Mueller. This kid's name was Locke Mueller. We won that by a point. They had a last-second shot and missed it. This Steve Lockmuller played freshman ball for the University of Kentucky next year. Ran into him there. And so the night game of the Summit State, I ended up playing. We lost. We played Floyd Central. What was interesting was Floyd Central was I guess you'd call it a county school, or they considered it a rural school. It's in Floyd County, but they played Jeffersonville, New Albany, those city schools. Floyd Central called themselves a Super Hicks because they were the country school. Floyd Central was twice as big as Loogootee. So it was funny that the year before, when we were playing Carmel, Loogootee was portrayed as this rural, farm school. The next year, they didn't portray us as anything, but Floyd Central, they were the Hicks, and in fact, their coach said if they won the Summit State, he would drive from the Summit State gym back to whatever town it was on a tractor. So just lots of hoopla. We were just outgunned in that game. They had more size, more talent. This was a team that scored 43 points in one quarter during the regular season. 41 points, let's make it. I know it was over 40. Can you imagine that, Billy? 41 points in a quarter. They had an Indiana All-Star who ended up going to Kentucky to play. Tony Smith and I disagree about this a little bit. I didn't feel like we were ever in the game. We lost by 9, I think, our second biggest loss of the season. We may have been within 7 with a couple of minutes to go, but they were used to playing a run and gun. It's kind of like in Indiana. The farther south you went, the faster the play was. We pressed, and we scored about 69 points a game on average. They were farther south than us. They pressed the whole game, and they got a lot of points on the fast break. So, season was over. It was a really good season. We did more with less talent than the team the year before us. We had the comparison of going like 70, and we were 1 game shy of the state finals. There's a saying, you talk about something happening to somebody, and there's a saying that the harm's already been done. For me, the benefit had been done. I'd had an experience really starting with the last game of the regular season, but mainly in that sectional, I had an experience that it wasn't a fluke, and I couldn't undo, and I really couldn't look at myself the same way after having that success. And it wasn't just the success, it was the cards and letters from people stopping me on the street, people who I'd known forever, and they were always my fans, but just the appreciation that they showed, or how glad they were that I'd gotten my big chance. And there were a few haters too, not hating me, hating the coach. He should have played you all along. You could have done this all season long. And I've said in print, I've said in interviews, and I'll say again, absolutely not. I got as much playing time as I should have had throughout the entire season. I wouldn't have changed a thing. I think the people who hindsight is 20/20, and they can think all they want. That they just got to remember I had 4 points and a couple of rebounds in the first game of the season, and a lot of games that I got in and didn't score much at all. So it was a nice springboard to college, and so now I'm getting ready to go to college. I wanted to get a head start on college, so I went to summer school. It was a 6 or 7 week summer school before my freshman year. I think I mentioned this last time. More people called me Loogootee than John because everybody knew about Loogootee basketball. IU was just 50 miles away. I played really well in intramural leagues and in pickup games, and I played with a lot of confidence. And it just happened that a guy who played freshman as a walk-on the year before me lived on the same floor in the dormitory, talked me out to going out as a walk-on. So I've gone through the process that got me onto the freshman team. The freshman team had to have walk-ons because Bob Knight he got hired late at IU, and his recruiting got a late start. Just to kind of show you where I stand with Coach Knight, of all the players that he's ever had play for him, all the players who came from Loogootee that played for him, all the players who came from Sycamore Street, where I lived, who played for him, all the players who came from Loogootee, Sycamore Street, whose initials were J.O., who played for him, I was the second best. We had a kid up the street named John O'Malley who played for the undefeated St. John's Eagles the season before. It was the 68-69 season. He played for Coach Knight at Army. So just think about that. I wasn't even the best kid on my street in Loogootee with the same initials who played for Coach Knight. So Coach Knight had to he had to get some recruits. He had some great ones. He had John Laskowski from South Bend St. Joe, and Steve Allfeld, who's still the team orthopedic surgeon from Wabash, Indiana. Steve Green from Silver Creek, and his 1 year older brother RT played at ISU. I played with Steve on the freshman team the next year. One of my favorites was John Kamstra, who was about a 6'2" forward from Little Rossville, one of the most clever players. We had a couple of guys that transferred. We had a 4-year deep sub named Doug Allen, who was 6'4", and probably if the coach said, go kill this guy, he'd have done it. He was one of the roughest, most rugged, hardcore guys. And we needed 3 walk-ons. So Jeff Lowe, who died in a traffic accident probably before he hit age 30, he was from Shelbyville, Indiana. He played. as a walk-on. I made it as a walk-on. And we had a really quick guard named, I believe his name was Kenny Davis. Oh, my gosh. I don't think both of his feet were never on the ground at the same time, and often neither foot was on the ground. He was so fast. I think he appealed to Coach Knight because during tryouts, he wore he'd come in wearing what we'd call a Smokey the Bear hat, looked like a state trooper hat, but it was really a military hat. He was a veteran. He'd already been through, he was probably 23 years old. He'd had 3 or 4 years of service. Kenny was really good, but I think that he realized pretty early on he'd had enough of taking orders. And so he dropped off the team pretty quickly. So we had 9 guys on the freshman team, and we practiced with the varsity. So here's our first meeting with Coach Knight. And let me say, Coach Knight, I believe, was going to be the coach at either University of Minnesota or University of Wisconsin. I can't remember which one. He had interviewed. He had accepted the job.
Wisconsin.
A couple of Wisconsin, okay. One of the contingencies was that he wanted to go back and tell his players at Army that he was leaving. He didn't want any word to get out before he went back to Army and talked to his players. Before he could get back to Army and talk to his players, word got out, and what I was always told was he told the University of Wisconsin, I can't trust you. I can't trust you with the first thing I asked. I'm not taking the job. So Indiana got it. Indiana was coming off of Coach Lou Watson. He had a ton of talent. He had George McGinnis, Steve Downing, John Ritter. He had some great players, but very undisciplined. And Coach Knight's reputation was a disciplinarian. I remember the first time we met him. We didn't see him at all during preseason scrimmage because it was illegal. So the first time we see him, we have about 20, 30 guys in a semicircle standing out in a big open area. This is the day before practice starts. Coach Knight is about 6'5". He leans forward at the waist when he walks. So as he's coming towards you, he looks like he's coming faster than he is, and he's leaning in. And you kind of, the look on his face and all, this is before we really knew any of his reputation, he's a little on the intimidating side. He walks up to the first player. This is 1971, fall of 1971. He looks at the first player, points at him, and says, "Don't come back until you get your hair cut." And that's the way he goes around the whole circle. Don't come back until you get your hair cut. And practices the next day. Doesn't matter whether you're a scholarship player or what. My hair wasn't super long. By the time he got to me, I was able to wet it and put it behind my ears. So there are a few of us who didn't have to get our hair cut. But I'll bet you everybody had a haircut by the time they came back the next day. So that was the first impression. Another early impression, and then I'll get to practices, which were really my games. Another early impression was the Bloomington Kiwanis Club had a preseason banquet for the team, and so all of us, including the freshman players, got plunked down at a table with people we didn't know, townspeople, Kiwanis members and their spouses, and Coach Knight talked. And the only thing I can remember him saying is telling the Kiwanis in particular, and the fans in general, the boosters in general, stay away from the players. I don't want any problems with money, with jobs. Stay away from the players. And my thought was, it sounded pretty rude to me. Once I heard more history from other players and so on, I think that's exactly what he was hired to do, was to clean up some things that may not have been on the up and up. So you knew where you stood with Coach Knight all the time. You knew in the drills, I'll tell you that there are very few personal stories with me and Coach Knight, so I'll tell the few that there are. Early in the season, we were practicing against the varsity, and I went up for a shot on the baseline, and something blocks out all the lights. It turns out it's Steve Downing, who's 6'6", played for the undefeated Indianapolis Washington High School state champions a couple years before. He blocks his shot probably with his armpit. Coach stops the practice, and he really, guards weren't encouraged to shoot, but I got a rebound on the baseline, put it up, and he asked me what I was doing, and I just looked at him and said, "Coach, I've never played against a guy this big. I mean, it was true. Never anybody who was this tall, never anybody who could jump like this, you know, and he wasn't in my half of the court when I started to wind up for my shot. You know, he flew in out of no place. Coach didn't really say much about it, but late in the season, we had the identical thing happen. The sky is, you know, the lights are blocked out again. In desperation, I throw up a shot that scrapes the corner of the backboard. I'm on the baseline. It scrapes the corner of the backboard and goes in. And coach stops. And he asks me some question, and I led him to believe that that was my plan. Obviously, he and everybody else knew it was absolute desperation, you know, and he laughed. He had a good sense of humor. He would often ask questions and bet a steak dinner on it. Sometimes they were a little on the profane side, but he had a good sense of humor, as well as having somewhat of a temper. He knew exactly what you should be able to do. And I remember, again, late in the season, I knocked a pass out of bounds. I was on defense and knocked a pass out of bounds. And my first thought was, I was a step out of position, and I know I was. I should have had a steal. And as soon as I had that thought, Coach Knight yells, "You were a step out of position. If you were where you're supposed to be, you'd have had that as a steal." He always knew what you were capable of. And that's why late in blowout games, in varsity games, in close games, he wouldn't call a timeout because he'd taught you what you were supposed to do.
Right.
Late in blowout games, he would call a timeout, and sportscast people would go nuts because he would be reaming a player. He expected you to play the right way all the way through the game. If you didn't, you were in trouble. So I'm going to sum up my freshman career with this. I was 1 for 6 from the field. The one was a shot from the top of the key that banked in. No, I didn't call it. There was always a risk. If I inbounded the ball as a guard, there's a risk of it being stolen. If I dribbled it up court, there was a greater risk of being stolen. So what we kind of adapted to do was one of the better guards would inbound it to me and cut past me, and I'd hand it off. Probably the most scared I was in any game was John Campstra's wife was pregnant, was going to have a baby, so he missed the game. So now we're down to 8 players. Another guard got into foul trouble. It looked like I was going to be forced to play a lot of guard. That scared the heck out of me. I was way out of my league. So I want to say a couple of things to kind of summarize my career at Loogootee and at IU, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I'm going to start with IU. I may have guarded in practice. I may have guarded one of the smartest players to ever play at IU, and John Ritter, who was an Indiana All-Star for Goshen. He was 6'5", or maybe 6'6" if he fluffed his hair. Wasn't a great jumper, was extremely smart, and he, to me, became the key to Coach Knight's motion offense. An motion offense is a set of rules, not a set of plays, but a set of rules. If this happens, then these options go into effect. If this happens, these options go into effect. There's nothing mechanical about it. And guard brings it down. They decide which side of the floor they're going to bring it down, but the guy who played John Ritter's position decided which set of rules went into effect. So I knew what the rules were, but I knew that as soon as I reacted to try to cut off one thing, he would do something else. I got the quote right. I looked it up, and Coach Knight said the mental is to physical as 4 is to 1. He coached those guys to be smart and to think about what they were doing. He asked one time in a practice, this was one of the quietest times. He said, he stopped the practice. He said, "Who's the best shooter on the floor?" Boy, you talk about no eye contact. Everybody drops their eyes and they're looking around. And he says, "You mean to tell me that we're going to get down to the end of a game and nobody knows who's the best shooter on the floor?" Well, somebody reluctantly said such and such, is the best shooter. There was no vanity to it. There was no saving anybody's feelings. You had to be smart enough to know who the best shooter was. There was a senior on the varsity when I was playing on the freshman team named Rick Ford. And Rick Ford had been an Indiana All-Star. And Rick Ford, to me, he wasn't really coordinated and smooth looking. and he played mostly at the end of games. And you'd think, oh my gosh, this guy looks almost like a human turnover. His senior year, he was 60 of 64 from the free throw line. Rick Ford was the guy you wanted in at the end of games. Jerry Memmering from Vincennes was the guy you wanted to shoot free throws at the end of games. John Ritter was the guy you wanted to make the decisions on your motion offense. So guarding John Ritter was an education and an honor. And one other comment I want to make about John Ritter is I believe John Ritter and Coach Knight more than anybody else, and I would challenge anybody to come up with competition on this claim. I believe those two are more responsible for the popularity of drawing the charging foul than anybody else. Coach Knight, we practiced, we had these awful charging fouls. When you're my size and a guy like Joby Wright, who is probably 220, 230, and 6'8", when you're taking a charge from him, oh my gosh, it's horrible. We practiced taking the charging fouls, but John Ritter was smart enough on defense to see when a guy was going to beat his man and go all the way to the basket. John Ritter could take a charging foul and sell a charging foul. And I think that those two, Coach Knight and John Ritter, to some extent revolutionized basketball by turning the charging foul into a weapon. Now I want to go back to high school. I thought a lot about it, and, certainly washing the laundry and polishing the basketballs was a contribution, and practicing against the varsity my senior year and playing some against the JV was a contribution. But in thinking long and hard about it, the thing I'm the proudest of in playing for Loogootee High School was that I guarded Brian Canada in practice almost every day. Brian was a junior. I was a senior. He's still Loogootee's all-time leading scorer. In fact, about, I think 2 weeks from Friday, we're having the 50th anniversary reunion of that state finalist team. I know Brian Canada is going to attend, and they've asked him to speak to the team before their ball game. He's still the leading scorer. The work that I put in and tried to put in making practice difficult for him and how hard I worked at it, I don't have any idea whether he may have appreciated the breather during the week. But for me, looking back, that's what I'm most proud of, is the defense I played in practice against Brian Canada. And then, Billy, I'd never thought of this before, and this has turned into quite a regret. My best friend growing up, Rex Sager, we did everything together. I mean, played every sport, got into every kind of fun and trouble. I never played on a team with him, never played on a basketball team with him. He was playing JV and varsity when I was a freshman. When I was a sophomore, he was exclusively varsity. When I was a junior and a manager, he was playing varsity. And then, of course, the next year he graduated. And it makes me sad that all those years that we spent together, we never played on the same team. So I gained tremendously from those programs and those coaches. It really, more than anything, has inspired me to try to teach people to think, kids to think. I'll tell you a quick story. I hope it's quick. My daughter, when she was about 5, we went to breakfast one morning at Bob Evans, and she left her purse behind. I don't know exactly what a 5-year-old keeps in a purse, but she left her purse behind at the Bob Evans. So we did some coaching with her, got her to probably at that time we had push-button phones. We were probably past rotary phones. Had her in her little 5-year-old voice call Bob Evans, explain who she was. She left her purse behind. They verified that she had it. She said, "We'll be right down." We walked in. She asked for the person she talked to on the phone. She got her purse. I'm not sure that I said a word. We were starting to teach her how to think for herself when she was 5. She's 45 now. She can think for herself and a lot of other people. It made me just always. Yesterday I had to help a kid get his drone 30 feet out of a tree. And we did some problem solving. We did some apologizing. So those coaches and my parents taught me to think for myself, think in novel ways, to be responsible, to look at everything as a challenge that can be overcome. As I said, for me, the benefit was done a long, long time ago. So I hear people talk about high school, those were the best days of my life. I always look at tomorrow having the potential to be my best day. And I got all that. I've got other sports, and we can boil this down if we want to basketball. Basketball has largely, I won't say it's made me the person I am today. Basketball equipped me to become the person that I am today. That's kind of what I've got.
Hey, I know we're running long once again. Man, we can make this a weekly thing. But tell me, is it the competition in Southern Indiana high school basketball? I'm still on high school basketball. Is it a passion or is it a hatred? What were some of your favorite places to go to play high school basketball besides your home gym there in Loogootee? What did you run? Did you run into passionate fans? Did you run into fans that didn't like Loogootee? You understand where I'm getting?
I would say for some of the adults, there could have been hatred. We had a shoe on the floor once, a watch. Somebody said a pair of false teeth, coins from time to time. This didn't happen frequently. The adults don't have any other way, I guess, to express themselves. All these guys that we played, Bar Reeve, Bloomfield, Shoals, we knew these guys. We played them in every sport. In basketball, you're warming up. You don't get a chance to talk to them. When you play track, you run track and cross country with these guys, you talk to them, before you compete, or in baseball. So we knew these guys. It wasn't like we were going to their schools and playing pickup baseball, but we knew who they were. They knew who. I can't really say that there were guys who weren't your favorite players because they were dirty, but there were guys that you had a ton of respect for. I wrote my book, and I wrote a little bit about our game against Bloomfield, and I mentioned that those guys were studs. Those guys were all pretty physically developed, even as junior high students. They were strong and had defined muscles as high school players. So you fast forward about 45 years, one of them's doing a radio show, and he likes the fact that I referred to him as a stud in my book, and he's laughing about it. I can't say that I knew him, but I knew of him. He knew of me. No animosity. So it was competition. We wanted to win. We wanted to beat him, but I don't remember there being ever any trash talking. Trash talk, winning is the best argument. You win, you score on a guy. Why do you need to say anything else? So we had our traditional rivals, but I can't say that there was any hatred amongst the players. Rex Sager elbowed guys. I'm sure he got elbowed by guys. There was a player from Springs Valley, when I got in late in the game, he punched me in the back twice. In fact, in the semi-state final, the year that Loogootee went to the state finals, there was an Indiana All-Star from Seymour who punched Brian Cannon in the back a couple of times. There were players that you didn't like dirty play, but and it was the same thing. Again, I was the lowest man on the totem pole at IU. Purdue was a traditional rival. Steve Green had played in all-star games with these other all-stars. When our freshman team played the Kentucky All-Stars, he'd been on the all-star team with Steve Lockmuller and Jerry Hale from Floyd Central. So you wanted to beat them. I think the hatred, so to speak, is more from a fan's perspective. Just take IU and Purdue. I want Purdue to win every game that they possibly can, unless it's going to hurt IU in the standings. When we get to the NCAA tournament, I want the Big Ten teams to win every game they play. Unless I'm not any anti-fan of any school. I'm pro IU. I'm pro Big Ten. The only time I'm against the team is if it's going to hurt IU's chances.
John, what's it like? Tell me about, you went to Loogootee, years ago. What's it like to be a part of the family?
There's a complication in it. To be a part of that, the immediate family, it's great because everybody's a family member. When I go to this reunion, I'm going to go as a manager on that team. I wasn't a player. I'm part of the family, but I know I wasn't a player. It's a little different than the next year where I was a key player during the tournament. But everybody knows what Loogootee basketball was and what that meant. Outside of that, it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's nobody's business, but let me tell you that I am a husband of 46 years, a father of 45 years, a grandfather of 21 years, a psychologist of 35 years, a woodworker of nearly 50 years. I can go on and on and on, and somewhere down the list, I played freshman ball at IU, and I played varsity ball at Loogootee. What bothers me, and there are still people who introduce me as having played for Bob Knight, that was 1 year out of 66. I was the lowest man on the totem pole. I played in Coach Knight's program as that may define me for other people, or that may tell more about other people. May feel like that tells more about me in one sentence than anything else. But I've grown to kind of resent that. That is, like I said, that didn't make me the person that I am. That equipped me for me to make myself the person that I am. So, family membership is to me is kind of touchy. You know what? You were a manager and I was a manager, and you and I talked, off the air about you scoring 2 points the year you were still a manager. You and I are a family, and that's a really unique family for managers to have scored in a varsity game. You ran into Tony Nante. Which Nante did you run into?
Terry. Yeah,
Terry
Nante.
Nante.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know the Nantes, and we were next door neighbors to them for a while before I ever had him as a coach. So basketball is a huge family, and you don't have to go very far. You can play 6 degrees of separation, and you can find how you're related to somebody who's related to not just Indiana basketball, but Terry Stotts, who's the Portland Trail Blazers coach, I believe, played pickup ball with him in the old field house at IU. He was a senior at Bloomington North High School. I know a guy. I played in an outdoor tournament against Larry Bird, who, it's a big family, and I don't want to make a big deal about playing a couple pickup games against Terry Stotts, but it's a huge extended family. And then you get down to your team. And even within your team, I didn't realize that, the team isn't as unified. The team on the floor is greatly unified, but off the floor, there are cliques, and so it goes to your nuclear family, and then your extended family, and then your 18th cousin twice removed. So it's, and maybe I overthink all of this, but I'm really looking forward to seeing those guys on December 6th, and the stories. The whole town is invited to a meal afterwards, and it'll be, 50 years. One of the starters from my senior year has died. Paul Brunner, great starting guard from the state finalist team, and the team the next year, he's died. And at 50 years gone, a lot of the fans who witnessed what we did will be gone. But I'll bet you in Loogootee, it'll be one heck of a reception.